Red and blue lights flash across my tomato plants. I open the door confused, only to find a federal agent standing next to Karen, arms crossed, smug smile. I'm about to be investigated for flying a drone over my own backyard. But here's what she doesn't know. That drone? It's not just mine. It's part of a federally funded environmental study. And when the truth comes out, she'll wish she never made that call. The buzz was soft at first, a gentle hum over the tomato vines and raised garden beds. I had just launched the drone for a routine sweep over my backyard vegetable patch, checking for signs of soil erosion. It was early evening, the sun just low enough to give everything that perfect golden tint. I was piloting from my patio, warm coffee in hand, when I saw movement in the corner of my eye. Across the hedge, just beyond the fence line, she was watching me. Again. Her name is Diane, but everyone in the neighborhood calls her Karen. If there's a flower pot slightly out of HOA code, she's on it. If your grass is half an inch too tall, you'll get the email. Her house backs up directly to mine, separated by a narrow greenbelt and a thin sense of civility. The first time she noticed the drone, she stepped outside with binoculars. No subtlety. Just stood there, squinting up like I was operating a military-grade spy device, instead of a quadcopter meant to capture crop health. She didn't say a word that day. Just watched. A few days later, she made her move. "Is that thing even legal?" she snapped, approaching the edge of her property line. "You can't just fly that over people's homes. You might be recording us." I calmly explained it wasn't flying over anyone's home, just my yard and a patch of HOA-managed greenbelt that bordered our properties. The drone was part of a precision gardening setup, feeding data to my university's environmental program. Nothing creepy, nothing secret. But she wasn't listening. She crossed her arms, scowled, and muttered something about national security and privacy laws. Brush it off. She was just being Karen. Over the next week, I noticed her filming with her phone from her second-story window. She began keeping her blinds tilted, just enough to see through, but not quite open. I tried to ignore it. I had more important things to focus on. The environmental survey I was part of was analyzing backyard agriculture's role in water conservation. My drone was collecting thermal data, humidity levels, and plant health metrics, all anonymized and stored on a secure cloud platform for the university's research group. Still, she was getting bolder. One morning, I found a laminated note taped to my front door. It wasn't signed, but I knew who it was from. It read, "Cease all aerial activity immediately. HOA rules prohibit unmanned surveillance devices. You have been reported." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because she clearly didn't know what she was poking at. There was no HOA rule about drones. I checked. What I was doing was legal, documented, and cleared. I had copies of my FAA Part 107 certification and a written agreement from the research coordinator. But it was already too late. Karen had made a call, not to the HOA, but to someone higher. I found out 2 days later when a plain white SUV rolled up to the curb outside my house. A man stepped out, dressed in a gray suit with a government badge clipped to his belt. He wasn't smiling. Karen was already outside, phone in hand, filming like she was starring in her own made-for-TV victory. "You see," she said to the agent, "that's the drone. That's what I've been telling you about. It's dangerous." I stepped outside as he approached. The air felt heavier than usual. My drone was still mid-flight, circling back over my squash plants. The agent looked at me, then at the device in the air. "Sir, we've received a complaint involving unauthorized drone activity in a residential area," he said. "I need to ask you a few questions." And that's when everything started to unravel, not for me, but for her. He didn't ask to come inside. He didn't need to. The federal agent stood on my lawn, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning between me and the drone circling overhead. Karen was still filming, whispering something to her husband as if she was catching a criminal in real time. "I just need a few clarifications," he said, adjusting his earpiece. I nodded and motioned toward the patio. I powered down the drone and brought it to a soft landing. It whirred for a moment, then fell silent, resting on the landing mat like nothing had happened. But everything had. The agent was calm but serious. He introduced himself as an investigator with the Federal Aviation Administration. Apparently, a complaint had been filed alleging that I was operating an unmanned aerial vehicle over private residences without consent. That alone might not have raised alarms, but the complaint included specific and inflammatory claims that the drone had flown within feet of bedroom windows, that it had hovered above children, that it had endangered pets. I stared at him, stunned. Karen's lies weren't just exaggerations. They were designed to trigger an official investigation. Designed to ruin me. I handed over my FAA license and pointed to the binder I kept in my storage box. Flight logs, airspace maps, proof of coordination with university's research department. Everything in perfect order. I even offered access to the drone's onboard telemetry, GPS data, altitude, timestamps. He took his time flipping through the documents, nodding slowly. Every page he read made Karen's accusations fall further apart. "That's very thorough," he said. "Not many civilians keep this level of documentation." I'm forced to half-smile. I had a feeling I might need it. He looked back toward the street, where Karen stood, arms folded, watching like a hawk. You could feel the energy shift. The smugness she wore just 10 minutes earlier had started to fade. Something in her posture had changed, shoulders slightly lowered, foot tapping. "I'm going to need to speak with her too," the agent said. She didn't wait. She stormed across the sidewalk toward us, holding her phone out like a badge. "Are you taking this seriously?" she snapped. "I've lived here for 12 years. This man has been flying that thing over my garden, my dog, my home. I don't feel safe." "None of us do." The agent turned, his tone shifting to something cooler. "Ma'am, I've reviewed the operator's documentation. So far, everything checks out as compliant with federal regulations." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her eyes darted to me, then back to the agent. "But what about the children?" I said it was flying near their windows. "I haven't seen any evidence to support that claim," he replied calmly. "The GPS records indicate the drone never crossed into your property lines." Her lips tightened. "I want to call the HOA again." "You'll see." The agent didn't flinch. "You're welcome to do that, ma'am. But I will be including a note in my report about the accuracy of your statement." I watched her flinch like she'd been stung. Later that night, I got the email, a formal notice from the HOA, citing aerial disturbances and potential violations of community guidelines. It had Karen's fingerprints all over it. The language was vague, but the threat was clear: stop flying or face fines and possible legal action. I didn't reply. I attached all documentation and forwarded it to the university's legal team. Within hours, they responded with a confirmation. The drone flights were part of a federally supported environmental study, previously cleared with the city and exempt from most HOA interference. What I didn't know was that Karen had already called 3 more times, once to the HOA board, once to animal control, claiming the drone scared her dog, and once again to the FAA. She wasn't done. What started as a hobby had now turned into something else entirely. I wasn't just defending my right to fly a drone. I was defending the truth against someone who'd stop at nothing to twist it. That night, the drone sat powered off in the case. But I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the soft hum in my head, not from the drone, but from the war Karen had started. And she hadn't even begun to lose yet. The sound of the drone was gone, but the tension in the air was louder than ever. The next morning, I found tire tracks on the edge of my driveway. The same white SUV had returned. This time, the agent didn't knock. He waited, standing by his vehicle, watching the house across the street. Karen's house. I stepped outside slowly, pretending to water the garden. He nodded in my direction, but didn't approach. Karen, on the other hand, did. She burst from her front door in a cloud of perfume and indignation, dressed like she was headed to court. "I've spoken with my attorney," she called out to him. "And I have more to add to the case." The agent didn't blink. He simply raised his clipboard and motioned toward her steps. Whatever patience he had left was wearing thin. She launched into a speech about neighborhood safety, about personal rights, about drones being used to spy on families. Her voice was sharp and desperate, and I could tell even from a distance, she was pushing too hard. She'd expected the first visit to shut me down. Instead, it brought the truth closer to the surface. I couldn't hear the entire conversation, but I didn't need to. Her voice rose with every sentence, but his never did. He spoke softly, like a man delivering facts that couldn't be argued with. Later, the neighbor showed me security footage from his doorbell camera. You could hear Karen demand an apology from the FAA, insisting that I be fined or arrested or, at the very least, grounded. What the agent said next made her go silent. The drone flights are part of a federally partnered environmental survey conducted through a state university. You filed a false report with this agency. I'm obligated to document that. That was the crack in her armor. She stumbled over her words, tried to backtrack, claimed she was misinformed and just concerned, but the agent was done. He handed her a written summary and calmly walked back to his vehicle. She watched him drive away, then turned to stare at me across the yard. Her eyes were different this time, not victorious, but shaken. She wasn't expecting this. She thought she could control the narrative. But the truth had weight behind it now. Official weight. I kept my drone grounded for 2 days, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted her to sit in that uncertainty. Let her wonder if she'd finally crossed a line she couldn't explain away. The HOA didn't back down immediately. I received another letter, this one colder, more formal. It cited safety concerns and community disruption, but it didn't mention law. It didn't mention legality. Because they knew. They were guessing now, bluffing. So I responded with documentation again, this time from the university's legal department. A direct citation from the FAA's integration partnership that protected our operation. The drone was being used to monitor water absorption, detect runoff zones, and provide aerial mapping for low-resource gardening systems. And still, Karen wouldn't let it go. She began knocking on doors, warning neighbors about the spy drone. She posted in the neighborhood Facebook group lengthy rants about how her privacy had been violated and how she was taking legal action. But something had changed. Her voice didn't sound like authority anymore. It sounded like noise. 2 houses down, a retired couple who'd been neutral up to that point sent me a private message. "We're sorry we didn't say anything earlier," it read. "Karen's been causing problems for years. What you're doing is helping people. Let us know if you need someone to speak up." I stared at the message for a while. It wasn't just about a drone anymore. It wasn't just about plants or sensors or data. It was about someone trying to crush something she didn't understand, just because she could. That night, I launched the drone again. Slowly, silently, I guided it over the backyard, above the garden, out past the HOA's manicured paths, and into the data zone. It captured what it always did: soil shifts, light saturation, infrared scans of the nearby trees. But this time, something else stood out. On the edge of HOA land, where public irrigation was supposed to flow into the main greenbelt, there was an unusual patch of growth. Greener, thicker, too perfect. I hovered for a moment and snapped a few more frames. Karen had made the drone her enemy. But what she didn't know, not yet, was that the drone had captured more than she wanted anyone to see. And that was the beginning of the end. The drone hovered like a quiet witness. From 50 feet in the air, it didn't care about drama or lies. It just recorded what was there. And what it saw was impossible to ignore. That patch of suspiciously green grass wasn't just healthy, it was unnatural. In the middle of a dry stretch, it looked like an oasis. Perfect rows of ivy where there should have been mulch. Patches of ornamental ferns that didn't grow anywhere else in the neighborhood. And hidden just behind a hedge, something that looked like a pipe, not HOA infrastructure, not city placed. I didn't want to believe it at first, but the images didn't lie. I downloaded the infrared scan and compared it to last month's data. That area had gone from dry and patchy to dense and overgrown in less than 3 weeks. And it wasn't part of any approved landscaping. It wasn't even on the HOA's maintenance schedule. I cross-referenced the GPS with the plat map. The land was supposed to be shared to Greenbelt. No resident was allowed to make modifications without board approval. But someone had. And it didn't take long to figure out who. The drone had recorded her. Not Karen herself exactly, but a figure matching her height and build, wheeling what looked like a fertilizer sprayer through the hedge late at night. The footage was grainy, shot in near darkness, but the timestamp was clear. 11:42 p.m., 3 days after her second FAA complaint. It didn't make sense. Why would the person screaming about rules and surveillance sneak onto shared land to install irrigation illegally? Then it clicked. She wasn't afraid of my drone. She was afraid of what it might see. Karen had built a secret garden on public land. She was using HOA water lines meant for community irrigation to nourish her private collection. Exotic plants, non-native vines. Expensive greenery she'd never be allowed to plant legally. And that pipe I saw, it connected back to her side yard. I traced it the next morning, hidden beneath decorative stones, buried shallow under a fake patch of turf. For years, she'd weaponized the HOA, cited bylaws, reported neighbors. But she was violating the biggest rule of all, stealing community resources and altering protected land. I didn't go public right away. Instead, I compiled the data, the drone logs, the side-by-side image comparisons, the thermal maps. I included timestamps, coordinates, even a clip of her dragging that sprayer past the hedge under cover of night. Then I printed everything. I knew the next HOA meeting was in 2 days. Karen would be there. She never missed one. She treated them like a courtroom where she was judge, jury, and executioner. I showed up 5 minutes early, binder in hand. The room was small, folding chairs, stale coffee, fluorescent lights. A dozen neighbors filled the space, some smiling politely, others looking tired from years of petty rule enforcement. Karen stood near the front, speaking to one of the board members with that same smile she always wore when she thought she'd already won. I waited. When the floor opened for resident concerns, she was the first to raise her hand. "I want to address the drone situation," she began, projecting her voice with rehearsed confidence. "There's been growing discomfort in the neighborhood. I've spoken to several families who feel unsafe, and I believe it's time we consider a vote to restrict aerial activity." The room fell quiet. All eyes turned to her, then to me. I stood, heart steady, and opened the binder. "I'd like to share a few drone images," I said, "of unauthorized modifications to HOA land, of misused water lines, and of activity that violates Section 3.4 of Community Landscaping Agreement." Karen froze. She turned to the projector screen as the images popped up. Frame by frame, time-stamped, geodecked. There was no denying them. A murmur ran through the room. One board member leaned forward, reading through the packet I'd handed him. Another shook his head slowly. Karen didn't speak. Not for once. She stood there rigid, her hands clenched at her sides as everything she'd built, every rule she'd weaponized, cracked wide open in front of her. And I hadn't even played the final card yet. Silence has a strange power when it falls in a room full of people who just saw the truth for the first time. Karen didn't sit down after I showed the final drone image. She just stood there, her face pale and stiff, as the HOA board shuffled papers and whispered among themselves. The carefully constructed image she'd built, rule enforcer, community protector, neighborhood queen, was unraveling in real time. One board member finally spoke. His voice was flat, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. "Karen, were you aware of this irrigation line?" She didn't answer. Not at first. The pause stretched so long it made everyone uncomfortable. Then she gave a laugh, high-pitched, sharp, defensive. "I planted a few vines. Big deal. They weren't hurting anyone." He raised the printed report I'd handed him. "This is not a few vines. This is a rerouted water line, unauthorized landscaping, and clear encroachment on HOA-managed property. That's a violation of at least 3 standing codes." She started to say something else, another excuse, maybe, but he held up his hand. "Let's be very clear. You filed multiple official complaints against your neighbor. You accused him of misconduct, of surveillance, of disturbing the peace. And all the while, you were hiding this." That's when the murmurs began again, this time from neighbors. The couple from 2 doors down. The man who kept his yard meticulously trimmed. Even the woman Karen once accused of having an unapproved mailbox. It was as if the entire neighborhood finally saw her clearly. She wasn't protecting the community. She was manipulating it. The board motioned for a recess. When they returned 10 minutes later, the tone had shifted completely. One member announced a formal investigation into Karen's actions, pending a review of water usage and land alterations. Until that process concluded, she was barred from participating in HOA enforcement. In other words, she'd lost her power. That alone might have been enough. But there was one more twist. Later that week, I received an invitation from the university team. They were presenting the preliminary results of our drone survey at a local environmental summit, showcasing how backyard data collection could map water waste, promote sustainable gardening, and identify unauthorized land use. They included Karen's illegal irrigation as a case study. It wasn't about revenge. It was about validation, proof that facts matter. That technology, when used responsibly, could shine a light on more than just soil and plants. It could expose lies. The summit drew press attention. A small article was published in the local paper. Karen's name wasn't used, but enough people recognized the story. She stopped showing up to board meetings. Her Facebook group disappeared. Neighbors said she kept her curtains drawn now. She still lived across the street, still watered her legal plants. But the hedge was gone. The secret garden had been torn out by HOA order. The illegal pipe sealed off. And me? I kept flying. The drone returned to its quiet mission, hovering over rows of lettuce, snapping heat maps of tomato soil, scanning light patterns over squash vines. Sometimes neighbors waved at it. Sometimes they even asked for help setting up their own backyard sensors. Everything had changed. The tool Karen tried to shut down had ended up improving the entire block. The data helped save water. It inspired a few residents to build shared beds along the community trail. One woman even asked me to teach her son how to fly drones for his school science fair. What started as a complaint ended in connection. And Karen, the woman who once called the FAA on me, now live in the one house no one really listened to anymore. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to fly high enough for everyone to see. And sometimes, all it takes is one drone to reveal what someone's been hiding all along.